All right, we're going to discuss the market forces of supply and demand. Before I move forward, I just want to explain that this is one of the most important concepts. Supply and demand are most important concepts for economics, regardless of whether you're discussing macroeconomics or microeconomics. So you want to have a basic understanding of supply and demand moving forward with economics. Supply and demand are two of the most used words in economics, and it refers to the behavior of people as they interact with one another in competitive markets. Now, in this course, we'll discuss two different types of markets. We have the market of goods and services and the factors of production. For the goods and services market, the firms supply the goods and services, the homes demand the goods and services. It's the total opposite for the factors of production market, where the homes supply things like land, labor, capital, and then the entrepreneurs that work in the in the industry, and then the firms demand what the homes are supplying. For our discussion for this, for supply and demand for this lesson, we're going to be discussing the goods and services market. And within the market for goods and services, we'll talk about two different types of market. We'll have the traditional markets, which are like the brick and mortar stores, like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, things like that. And then we'll also have the online markets where you have Amazon and eBay, where there's no physical location. So another thing that we're going to break down as far as a rule when we discuss supply and demand, we're going to assume that what we're talking about as far as the market, that it's competitive. Every market that we discuss in this chapter is going to be a competitive market. So remember that. So in these competitive markets, there will be many buyers and many sellers. No one entity in the market has influence over the price. We'll talk about market power, which is the ability for individual firms to influence price very little with very little market power. And then we'll discuss a little bit about how monopolies affect markets and competition as well. And in a monopoly, that's when one company has control and influence. So in a perfectly competitive market, and again, we're only talking about goods and services, price will be the main factor that will drive purchases. Some examples of perfectly competitive markets would be things like printer paper, where I can't think of any printer companies, but the paper is pretty much the same. And the decision that you make to purchase is more than likely going to be based off of the price of the paper. Another example of a perfectly competitive market would be something like toilet paper, where you have companies like Angel Soft, Charmin, or even the generic brand, where it might have a different texture, different strength, and a different cost. But for the most part, I mean, for me, I generally purchase the one that doesn't cost as much. The quantity demanded, the definition for that is it's the amount of a good that buyers are willing and able to purchase at different price levels. So let's think of an example where the price of a good will affect how much or how little we purchase. So let's think about bottled water. where if the price is $1 per bottle, you may purchase less. You may buy 5 for $5. But if the price goes down by 50 cents, where it's 50 cents a bottle, you're probably going to pay or buy more. So if you buy 10, you're going to be paying $5. So kind of like the same amount. If it was for $1, you bought 5 for $5. But if the price got cut by half, you're going to still spend that same $5, but you're going to buy an extra 5, so double up on the amount of water bottles that you purchase. So we'll talk about the law of demand. With everything else being equal, like the quality, the location, the color, what the law of demand states that when prices rise, the quantity demanded decrease, and then vice versa. When the prices decrease, the quantity demanded increases. So with my example with the bottled water, when the bottled water was $1, you only bought 5. But when the price was 50 cents per bottle, you bought 10 instead of 5. Now there are some examples where the law of supply or the law of demand isn't followed. An example of this would be several years ago there was a cosmetic brand that was trying to establish their market share in China. When they entered the market, they had a very low price for the first year. The company had a hard time selling cosmetics at that low price. So what the company decided to do was they decided to increase the price. And once they increased the price, the quantity that the quantity demanded from the customers also increased. They kept the same advertisement, the same container. The only difference was that they increased the price, and it did the total opposite of what you expect when you talk about the law of demand. So the reason why that cosmetic brand increased their sales when they increased their prices, possibly one of the reasons why is just the perception that the customers had or the impression that they had of a cheaper brand. They may have thought that maybe the materials or the things that the chemicals that were used in the cosmetics were cheap chemicals or cheap materials. So once the price got raised, the customers may have had a perception that maybe better quality materials was being used. Another example of where the law of demand didn't follow or a product didn't follow the law of demand, just think about an example where you go to a gas station, and I'm going to go back to the bottled water, where if there's a bottled water for $1, you're going to purchase it. But let's say that instead of the price being cut by 50 cents, let's say it got cut by 95 cents and the price of the water was 5 cents. Comparing the two, you have your your dollar your dollar bottled water, and then you have your 5 cent bottled water. I would probably buy the dollar bottled water because I'm not sure what's in that 5 cent water. It could be toilet water for all I know. I would just rather pay the dollar instead of paying the 5 cent for the bottled water. So that's another example of how the law of demand, when you think that when a price decreases, demand is going to increase. That's just another example of where that doesn't happen. So we're going to use a graph or use an image to explain how price and demand interact with each other. We're going to use a demand schedule. So I'm going to draw the demand schedule, and I'm also going to draw the demand curve. So here's the demand schedule right here. is price and you have your quantity. So at the price of $1, you see items were sold. At the price of cent, you see 7 items were sold. At the price of 25 cents, you see 10 items were sold. And then right here, you have the demand curve. So if we were to place this in here, I'm going to have to change this up a little bit so that my 5 items sold matches the curve a little bit better. Did a bad job of drawing this. All right, so at $1, there were 5 items sold. At 50 cents, there were 7 items sold. And at 25, you have that. And if you start $0, it's a little crooked, but that's kind of the way that the demand curve, how it slants. So here's another example of the demand schedule. So the demand schedule is right here. This is the demand schedule. And this is the demand curve right here. So you see at $0, 12 cones, that's the quantity demanded at $0. So you go to 0 for the price, and you see the quantity there. At 50 cents, you see 10 cones are demanded. So we go up to 50 cents, and then we go over to 10 cones. And if we go down to $2 per cone, you see the quantity demanded is 4. So we go up to $2, and you see right here is where the quantity is demanded. If you go to $3, you see there's no demand at $3. So $3, you see the quantity 0. So as you can see, as the price increases, the demand decreases. As the price decreases, the demand increases. So here's an example of market demand and how you can calculate the sum of individual demands. So you have Catherine in one part of the chart, and then you have Nicholas demand in another part of the chart. So what this chart is showing that as the price decreases, you see if you add both of the demands, you see how high it is. So I'm just going to go to both extremes. So you see $0 for the price of ice cream. You see the total market demand is 19 cones. When the price is $3, which is an increase from $0, you see the demand is 1 cone. You see Nicholas he only demands 1 cone, where Catherine demands 0. So this is kind of how the market demand is calculated and how it's summed, and how it also shows the law of demand. So when you're referring to shifts in the demand curve, you don't say it's going up or down. You say if it's increasing, you say the demand curve is shifting to the right. If the demand decreases, you say the demand curve shifts to the left. You don't say the demand shifts up, or the demand curve shifts up, or the demand curve shifts down. It's either shifting to the left or shifting to the right. There are 5 variables that can shift a demand curve to the left or to the right. You have income, you have prices of related goods, you have taste, expectations, and number of buyers. So when we're talking about income, we talk about normal goods and we talk about inferior goods. Normal goods are things like clothes, computers, cell phones, games. An increase in normal goods leads to an increase in demand, or excuse me, an increase in income leads to an increase in demand for normal goods. Inferior goods, on the other hand, it's the total opposite, where it's like the inferior goods are something like generic, off-brand food, clothes, generic cereal, and for college students, it's like things like ramen noodles. For inferior goods, the total it there's this the effect is opposite from normal goods. So for inferior goods, if your income increases, that leads to a decrease in demand for the inferior good because when you're making more money, you should have more money to spend on the non-generic brand items. The next variable that we're going to discuss are prices of related goods. So we'll break those down into two categories as well. We'll have our substitutes and then we'll have our complements. Substitutes are an example of that would be cell phones. There's two main cell phone companies right now. You have iPhone, you have Samsung. So an increase in the demand, increase in the price of one, say if the iPhone went up to $1,000, well, iPhone users or people who are interested in iPhone, if the Samsung is maybe half off or $750 as opposed to $1,000, they may decide to purchase the Samsung as opposed to the iPhone because of the price difference. For complement goods, these are goods that have to go together or usually are seen together. So an example of that would probably be like hamburgers and hamburger buns. So if a price if the price is increased on the hamburgers, there that might lead to a decrease in demand for hamburgers as well as hamburger buns. So the next thing is taste. An example of this would be uh, soda, soda pop, where if you don't like the taste of, let's say you have Coke and you have Pepsi. So if you don't like the taste of Coke, you'll probably purchase Pepsi as opposed to Coke. The next variable is expectations about the future. For income, if you expect your income to increase, that may lead to an increase in demand as well. You may want to spend more money. If you expect prices to increase, you may decide to purchase now as opposed to wait. An example of expecting higher price increase is every year the holiday season where you have Black Friday, where people pack the stores because the prices are expected to be a lot cheaper and they're expected to go up after the Black Friday holiday weekend. They'll pack the stores again that weekend or week before in expectation that once December hits, the prices are going to increase a little bit. So they want to get all of the sales right then and there instead of waiting a little bit later to pay more for the same item. Another example of that would be when people expect gas prices to increase. They may decide to go to the gas station, fill up their car on gas, and then as the days go by, they see that the price increases. They had expected the higher prices, so they went and purchased the gas when the gas was cheaper. So now we'll swing into the supply part. The quantity supplied shifts are the opposite of quantity demanded. Quantity sellers are willing and able to sell goods and services at certain prices. So, based off of the main goal of the company, and the main goal of any company is to make a profit. And the way that you calculate profit is you take your price, subtract the cost, and then you multiply whatever price minus cost is, you multiply that by the quantity. So as the price increases, the supply that a company has of a product or a good, that also increases. When the price decreases, the supply decreases. So with the law of supply, again, the price increase, that means the supply increases because as the price increases, that means that the profit should be increasing as well. So the company wants to make as much as they can off of that product. And then the opposite, when the price decreases, the supply decreases. So this is the opposite from the law of demand, where the law of demand says when a price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. When the price decreases, the quantity increases. So it's totally supply and demand they react to the price differently for the most part. As with the law of demand, we have we use a graphic that shows the effect of price and quantity for supply. So for supply, you have your supply schedule, which is a table, and then you also have a supply curve, which is the graph. So I'm going to draw it right now. So on the left side, this is the supply schedule. So at $1, you see 5 items are supplied. At 50 cents, you have 3 items supplied. At 25 cents, you have 1 item supplied, and at $0, you have 0 supplied. So here's the supply curve. You see the supply curve goes the total opposite way as the demand curve. So if we were to graph what was in our supply schedule, you see at $1, you see 5 quantity. So that's right there. At 50 cents, you see 3 items. And at 25 cents, you see 1 item. And at $0, you see 0 items. So you see that the supply goes that way when you're talking about demand. Demand would go, demand would. So looking at the supply schedule and supply curve in this figure, again, I'm going to get my pen here. You see at $0, you see 0 cones are supplied. At $1.50, you see 2 cones are supplied. And at $3, you see 5 cones are supplied. So if I was to chart that, you see at 0, there's nothing there. At 50 cents, you see there's still no quantity, no supply for it. When we go up to $1.50, you see it goes over to 2. So we put the dot right there. And as the price increases, you see that the supply of the items increase as well. So at $3, you see the supply is 5. And as the price keeps going up, you can expect the quantity supplied to increase as well. So what this figure shows is the market supply as the sum of individual supplies. So we see at $0, Ben or Jerry, they're not supplying any cones. So the market supply for $0 is 0. As we increase the price, so if we go down to $2 of the price, we see that Ben is supplying 3 cones, and Jerry is supplying 4 cones, giving us a total market supply of 7 cones. And if we go to $3, we see that Ben has 5 cones that he's supplying. Jerry has 8 cones that he's supplying, which gives us a total market supply of 13. So you can see as the price increases, and this is for supply, as the price increases, the supply of the products also increase, or the quantity of the supply also increases. As with demand, when we talk about increases in supply or decreases in supply, we either are going to say it's shifting to the right or shifting to the left. We're not going to say that it's shifting up or down. There are 4 variables that we're going to talk about that shift the supply curve to the left or to the right. First one is input prices. Second is technology. Third is expectations about the future. And then the fourth one that we'll discuss is the number of sellers. Input prices are pretty much saying what's the cost to produce a certain item or a certain good. And when I talked about it before, about as far as companies wanting to make the most profit, I talked about the equation that's used to calculate the profit. So profit equals price minus cost of goods times the quantity sold. So as the costs increase, the supply is going to decrease. So as the cost of goods increases, the supply decreases, which causes a shift to the left, which means that a company is going to have more profit. When the cost of goods decreases, the supply of the good is going to increase, which means that there's going to be a shift to the right, and the company should expect to have higher profits. Advancements in technology can help reduce a firm's cost of goods. So again, as the cost of goods decreases, the supply increases. So when I talk about shifting left and right, so I'm going to draw a graph, and we have our supply curve. So if it shifts to the right, it's going to go out like that. And so that's shifting to the right. To the left, so you see as the cost of goods increase, the supply decreases. So we'll discuss the number of sellers and how that affects the supply. An example of that would be something like when the LED TVs came out. When they first came out, there were only a couple of suppliers that made the TV. So we had Samsung and we had Sony. Now there are a lot more companies that make LED TVs, and they're available for purchase. So price for the consumer is a lot less, and the companies have to work within their profit margin so they can make as much money based off of how many TVs they're selling versus the cost of the materials to produce the TVs, as well as keeping in mind that there are a lot of sellers in the market of LED TVs. So you want to have the right price point and the cost that goes into that can help the companies have a larger profit. The last thing that we're going to discuss as it relates to supply and demand is the equilibrium. And what the equilibrium is where the supply curve and the demand curve, where they intersect. So I'm going to draw that to kind of give you a graphical view of what that means. best at drawing the example. So in red, you have the demand curve. So as the price increases, you see the demand, the quantity of demanded decreases. So at $4, you see the quantity demanded is 1. At $1, you see that the quantity demanded is 4. So the supply is totally opposite. So at $1, right around $1, you have 1 quantity supplied. At $4, you have 4 items or 4 products supplied. So right here where the two curves intersect, so at $2, 2 quantities supplied and 2 quantities demanded, this is where the equilibrium is. So that's what the equilibrium price is, or the equilibrium is. So if I wanted to say what the equilibrium price is, it would be $2, and the equilibrium quantity demanded or supplied is $2. So just looking at this figure, you see you have your demand curve, which is pointing downward, and you have your supply curve, which is pointing upward. So we have $3 at $3. The demand for the item is, looks like 3. The quantity of ice creams is 3. But if you look at $3, the supply is 11 ice cream cones that are being supplied. And if we look at $2.50, the demand is 5 ice cream cones. But if you look at the supply is 10 ice cream cones. So if we go down to $2, we get to the equilibrium, which is the equilibrium price, as well as the equilibrium quantity. So the equilibrium price is $2, and the equilibrium quantity is 7. So that's what the equilibrium is, or the equilibrium price, or the equilibrium quantity is. It's where the supply curve, and well, the supply curve is going upward, and the demand curve where they intersect, and these intersect at $2 for the price and 7 ice cream cones for the quantity. So that's pretty much the discussion on supply and demand. That's as far as I'm going to go for this lesson. Just remember, the law of demand states that when the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. The law of supply states that when the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. So just keep that in mind when you think about economics. Again, this is one of the most important things in economics that you can learn. This is the foundation of economics, supply and demand. So just keep that in mind.